sheriff in that situation, right? It's still gonna cost.
Shocked he's not been run over, to be honest.
Nobody
Yeah.
pull them over all the time.
How did that happen? How did somebody steal something? I didn't get into that much.
All right. Josh, you ready? Jeff, you ready?
Yeah.
He's good?
Yeah, we're good.
All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Macomb Township Zoning Board of Appeals meeting. My name is Aaron Tuckfield. I'm the chair. The time is 6:30 p.m., and I'm calling this regularly scheduled meeting to order. The second item on our agenda this evening is the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand with me for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, our secretary is not here this evening, so I think I'm going to call the roll. I usually do this before I start, make sure I have all the names in front of me so I don't screw them up when I'm going to call them the right time, so hopefully I'll get through this first roll call okay. With that, we've got the roll call for attendance, and I'm going to call it out. Mr. DeCoster.
Here.
Mr. Gamikia.
Present.
Mr. Mazzara.
Here.
Mr. Piper.
Here.
Mr. Tuckfield is present. That is a quorum, and for the record, we have one alternate member, which is within our bylaws. We are able to proceed, and all votes will be a standard vote of majority this evening. Next item on our agenda is to address any conflicts of interest. At this time, I will again call the roll. If any member has a conflict of interest on either of our items tonight, please signify by saying yes. If you have no conflict of interest, please signify by saying no. And I will again call the roll. Mr. Piper?
No.
Mr. Mazzara?
No.
Mr. Tuckfield says no. Mr. Gamikia?
No.
Mr. DeCoster?
No.
All right. Having stated no conflicts of interest, we're going to move on to item 5, which is the approval of tonight's agenda. Is there any discussion or motions on tonight's agenda?
Motion to approve the agenda.
Motion by Mr. Mazzara. Is there support?
Support.
Supported by Mr. Gamikia. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed by saying nay. That motion carries, and tonight's agenda is adopted. Next item on our agenda is the approval of the previous meeting minutes. Those would be the minutes from our February 6th regularly scheduled meeting. Is there any discussion or motions on the minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve the previous minutes as written.
All right, motion by Mr. Mazzara to approve the minutes as read. Is there support?
Support.
Supported by Mr. DeCoster. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed by saying nay. That motion passes, and the previous meeting minutes are adopted. Item 7 is old business. We have nothing under old business, so we will move on to new business. Item 8A is the first item on our agenda there. That'll be for permanent parcel 0819160009. The Goddard School is the petitioner, and this would be a variance to section 1020-7, table 20-7, and that would be with regards to ground signs. Mr. Box, could you please take us through this?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Board. So as you mentioned, this is for the Goddard School. They are seeking a sign exception, actually 2 sign exceptions, and those would be to allow 2 ground signs for the development where 1 is typically allowed, and to allow the second sign to be constructed in the boulevard with only a 4-foot setback from the curb lines of the center boulevard. So I do want to point out, I know you guys have heard this before, but these are sign exceptions. They're slightly different than variances. Sign exceptions, you don't have to provide a practical difficulty or a hardship. The ZBA is to consider a different set of standards, which I'll walk through here in a minute. And in your motion, granting or denying an exception, the ZBA needs to state the specific grounds for the decision, supported by the specific findings of fact, and conditions may be attached as deemed reasonable. So the standards, again, for an exception would be obstructions, meaning if there's anything preventing the sign from being visible, visibility, meaning if there's something blocking the typical location for a sign for that business, site features, if there's any natural features that would prevent the sign from conforming, the scale, what they're proposing is at the appropriate height or area for a sign in that area, aesthetics, whether or not the sign would adversely impact the character of the neighborhood. Minimal is what they're asking for, the minimum requirement to be reasonable, and the intent would the exception substantially impair the intent and purpose of this chapter of the ordinance. So the existing conditions, as you see on the screen behind you there, there's already one ground sign, and hopefully you can see my cursor up there. So this ground sign that you see in Street View here is located roughly here. This is all one large development. So because it's all one large development, the ordinance only allows one sign, which they already have one ground sign. They're seeking a second ground sign because Goddard School is very far in the rear. The sign that they have on their building is not really visible from Hayes Road. In addition to that, the Planning Commission has approved a building in this area, which is going to further impact the visibility for Goddard School. So the additional ground sign, as I mentioned, would be located in the boulevarded area. That's where they're proposing it to be. And the dimensions of 4 feet from the curb, that the boulevard itself is only 9 feet 4 inches. So if you take 4 feet off each side, that really only leaves them with a little over a foot wide for the sign. So I think that probably would meet the requirement for the minimum of what they're asking, should you approve this exception. Another thing to point out, as I mentioned before, there's already a building going in this location here. So the reason that it was decided to put this proposed sign in the boulevard is that, A, there's already a sign in front of this building. Putting a second sign in front of an existing building might be confusing to motorists, that the Goddard School would maybe be in that building. And the same would go if they put the sign over here. It might be confusing that it's in that building that's going to be built. So they're suggesting to put it in the boulevard itself. Our departments did review this. Assessing had no objections. Building noted that the request didn't create any building code issues. Engineering noted in general the request does not pose any engineering related concerns. Fire said the request is approved as submitted in their eyes, and Public Works did not provide any comments. The planning department did take a look at this. Visibility, again, they're very far in the rear, so I think it's fair to say that it's not the most visible sign that they have on their building, so this would give them more visibility. Regarding site features, a conforming sign, again, which they really already have on their building, is a conforming sign. It's not a ground sign, but it's a wall sign. It's difficult to see from Hayes Road, and I'm sure as the petitioners here will attest that they're getting comments that people didn't even know the school was back there. With regards to the scale, it's similar in size to the existing building sign. One thing I would note, as you see in this, what they're proposing, if you can see my cursor up there, there's a slot for the Goddard School, but there's also a vacant spot here. I'm going to go back a few slides so you can see the aerial. As I mentioned, there's an approval already for a building in this location, but this part of the development is still open and available. So the thought was that someday that may develop, and therefore if this is approved, there's now a sign for that as well. So it would kind of take care of that situation now if this were to be approved. I mentioned earlier with regards to minimum, I think it would apply to the 4 feet that they're requesting from the setback from the curbs. It's only 9 feet 4 inches across, so it would be impossible to be 10 feet back from the curbs, but 4 feet is probably about as far as you could go and still get a reasonable size sign with some lighting in the interior of the sign. And I do think that it meets the intent of the ordinance. So that being said, staff does not object to the sign, considering that it meets the intent of the ordinance for visibility, and it's really the most logical location for the sign to go.
All right, thank you, Mr. Box. Is there any questions for Mr. Box from the board?
I do have one quick
Go ahead,
question.
Mr. Piper.
I think it was last month that we had one for a subdivision where it was in the boulevard, and wasn't that an issue, having one in the boulevard?
Public roadways, which the road department has some jurisdiction,
Okay, so this is
they
a
don't allow
private
them,
road,
this is a
so it's-
private roadway, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And on this one, the setback away from the sidewalk meets your standards.
It does meet the standards, that's right.
I have a question as well.
Go, Mr.
So
Coster.
we can probably expect another item before us when that development to the north is built.
It's possible if they want a ground sign. They do have wall signs on what was approved, so Whether or not they'll feel that that's sufficient, I don't know.
And then maybe just looking for your opinion, you said we can't put conditions on this sign?
You can put conditions on sign exceptions,
What's
yes.
the staff's opinion on putting a condition at the bottom be used for that back building when it's built?
I would have no objection to that.
I'm,
Go ahead,
Yes.
Mr. McHugh.
Mr. Chair, I'm a little confused. I thought that was the intent of the application, was the forethought of having that extra panel for,
It is for the back. That is their intent. I think what Mr. DeCoster is saying is to make sure that the Normandy Optical Building, which would be the front side of the northern part, that they don't put their signage on this, that it's reserved specifically for the rear part of that development.
I see. Okay, thank you.
All right, Josh, I had a couple general questions. The first one, just to make sure that I'm clear, so the two exceptions are the fact that they're requesting an additional ground sign on the parcel, and the second would be the distance to the curb from the boulevard.
Correct.
Okay. So they're limited to one per parcel, and this parcel is not subdivided, it's not a condo, and that's why it's required only one ground sign per.
It's a traditional condo, so they only allowed one ground sign.
So, at some point in the past, we allowed a ground sign for the first building
Correct.
without considering the fact that they're only building on a quarter of the
Correct.
parcel. What is the maximum size allowed for a ground sign on this, do you know?
I don't have that in front of me, but if what they're proposing were bigger than what's allowed, I'm sure Mr. Maples would have flagged it when he signed their application.
I guess what I'm asking would drive more to the fact of, can the existing sign be replaced, could it be replaced with something bigger that would serve all of the developments?
I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head.
Okay.
My guess is it's pretty close to the maximum size, but I don't know that for sure.
Okay. Might be interesting as a side note to consider in the future, similar to that we have, and maybe we do, maybe I don't remember this in the ordinance, similar to some of our parking lot requirements, a requirement for a certain amount of signage per acre, if it's anticipated as a condo. Might be something to consider, just because, I mean, we backed ourselves into a corner here if we allow the sign. Okay. I think that's all my questions. All right, is the applicant in the audience? Feel free to come forward, sit down at the table. If you could state your name and address for the record and give any comments you might have.
My name is Mary Beth Ginzinger. I'm the owner of the Goddard School. I live at 6704 Donnybrook, Shelby Township, Michigan.
Hi, I'm Karen Wyka. I am the director of the Goddard School. I live at 15862 Aspen, Macomb Township.
Very good, thank you. Do you have any comments on this request this evening?
No, the thought was, we actually did know at the time that we did construct the building that we couldn't put a sign. So that's why I did the backlit sign, put up an American flag, try to draw the attention. But we know based on our enrollment and typical enrollment in Goddard schools, time of year opening, that our enrollment is a little bit lower than expected. So we did, the developer did allow me to put the coming soon sign up at the front, and I put another temporary sign up just recently advertising the GSRP program that we have. And we have seen a significant uptick in calls just from that sign. So if we actually had a real monument sign, I think that we'd have some more visibility to our school, more calls, and hopefully, more enrollment.
Okay, very good, thank you. Any questions from the board to the petitioner? Hearing none and without objection, I'm going to open this up to the public. If there's any member of the public who would wish to speak on this, please come forward to the microphone and state your name and address. We only have 2 members of the public, so I'm going to look at them and say, do you want to come up? They're saying no, and so without objection, I'm going to close public portion and bring it back to the board. Any other questions or comments? All right, hearing none, I would just remind the board on any motion so that, I believe, even though variances also require this, we are, supposed to put in the reasons and the findings of fact, for any motions that we have this evening. I think we should probably treat these two separately, so if we make a motion, please make a motion on them individually. So that would be just procedural. And then just for myself, if the intent of the ordinance is to advertise the business, and the owner made a good faith effort to advertise the business according to the ordinance and was not seeing sufficient advertising, to me, that goes to meeting the intent of the ordinance. I just wanted to point that out from the applicant's discussion. So, with that said, I will entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'd move to approve the request for a sign exception for permanent parcel 080819160009 in order to construct a second ground side sign within the Wellington Center Boulevard Island due to the following reasons. Due to the location of the building, the current intent of the ordinance as it stands would be best met by the approval of an exception. This is the most minimum necessary to effectively communicate the presence of the businesses in the rear of the building. That the sign exception request would not adversely affect the aesthetics, health, safety, or welfare of the public. And the conforming sign as it stands does not effectively notice the presence of the building because of obstructions in the roadway, and that the approval is conditioned upon the use of the additional panel on the sign being used for the next least visible business in the development.
All right, support by Mr. Gamikia, or motion by Mr. Gamikia. Is there any support? Support. Supported by Mr. Mazzara. Brief discussion on the motion. Anyone? I have one thing I just wanted to check. With our legal counsel, you good on wording and reasoning? That it was clear?
Yeah, the only comment I would have is on the condition, you said the least most visible. I just want to make sure everyone's comfortable with that.
That was questionable. I'm open to interpretation.
Yeah, I don't know is it earmarked for a specific unit, Josh?
So the Normandy Optical would be Unit 10, I believe. Goddard School is Unit 9. So most likely it's going to be Unit 11. I don't know if we want to say Unit 11 or any unit beyond Unit 10.
Maybe the way he said it's the best way to say it. I just wanted to
I didn't want to handcuff us in case
Yeah.
somebody backed out or.
It does leave the question open, though. There could be a debate over
Yeah.
the next most least visible. So that's my only comment, if you guys are comfortable.
I guess if I could, it's their sign. Do we leave it up to the petitioners?
My intent was that it was going to be to my neighbor to the north. But I don't, I'm not the developer, so I don't even know if that parcel can be split again.
If I could make the recommendation, that perhaps we consider not restricting it, even though I understand Mr. DeCoster's point. It seems unlikely to me that the building to the north is going to want to use that type of small horizontal spacing on a sign. They're much more likely, particularly with this exception being granted, to come in and request another one. And if they didn't and they requested it on that sign, and then there was a parcel in the back, there would be another request for a sign likely at some point, would be my only question. So I am fine if the motion goes either way, but it might be worthwhile to remove that and just let it play out as it plays out. I don't know if anyone else has any discussion on, or Mr. Box, if you had any comments.
I would be fine either way.
I think I still feel that it should be to the one to the north. Again, I don't want to be here in 2 years getting another monument sign asked for because Normandy Optical used the bottom because it's a little bigger, or whatever the case is. They don't want to install a new sign. They want to just put a panel up. I like the property to the north, but that's just me.
Perhaps that Mr. Gamikia may be amended to be used for the building, for any building eventually built at the northeast corner of the site.
I'm okay with that. If that is your intent.
That was my intent, but it doesn't, I'm okay with it.
And I like the condition. I don't want to remove the condition because then that could be used potentially. I'm not saying you're going to, but it could just be willy-nilly. Grand opening next week or open house next week. It's a lot of cost to go through, but I just want to make sure that the sign is used as it is intended.
Okay. If you're amenable to that modification,
Yes.
and I believe I have it on the record, is it clear enough on the record? Should we restate the motion?
I think it's clear enough.
Okay. And then Mr. Mazzara, I believe, second, are you still in support of it?
I am support.
All right, then, unless there's any other discussion, and with the amended motion, I'm going to call the roll. Mr. Demikia,
Yes.
Mr. Mazzara.
Yes.
Mr. Coster.
Yes.
Mr. Tuckfield votes yes. Mr. Piper.
Yes.
All right, that motion passes, and that was with regards to the second ground sign, not its location. Is there a motion with regards to the other setback or the other exception request? Hearing none, I will make a motion with regards to the second setback request, although I should verify which portion of the ordinance it's speaking to. I do not have it up. Mr. Box, is that the same section?
Yeah, bear with me 1 second if I,
Just 20-7?
20-7 is the
Okay.
sign.
Well,
Yes.
I think I can word it okay. I make a motion to approve the sign exception for permanent parcel 08191600009, section, exception to section 20-7, specifically to allow a 4-foot setback, where a 10-foot setback would otherwise be required, to the road. This will be based upon the fact, as previously stated, that the rear building does not have sufficient advertising based on real-world environment, that it maintains the purpose of the sign ordinance, and then it seems to be the minimum needed to grant the relief that is requested. Is there support?
I will second that motion.
Motion by Mr. Tuckfield, supported by Mr. Piper. Is there any discussion? Jeff, I'll ask you again, you okay with the, okay.
Thank you.
Again, and to clarify, just for the record, we've had discussions in the past that we should be putting our findings of fact in, and we've been encouraged to be clear with it, and I'm just verifying not that the motion is okay with the lawyer, but that we are being clear for the record, so just so we're all on the same page understanding that. All right, if there's no other discussion, I'm going to call the question. Mr. Tuckfield votes yes. Mr. Piper?
Yes.
Mr. Mazzara?
Yes.
Mr. Gamikia?
Yes.
Mr. DeCoster?
Yes.
That motion passes and both exceptions are approved. Thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.
All right, that moves us on to item 8B, which is a variance request from section 10.0323E4. This is with regards to bumper blocks in a paved lot. This will be for permanent parcel 08083000026, and the Lutheran High School Association is the petitioner. Mr. Box, could you please take us through this?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commission. As you mentioned, this is for Lutheran High North. They are requesting a variance to allow bumper blocks in an area of off-street parking. They're located at 24 in Garfield, the northeast corner. So the existing conditions, the bumper blocks are already in place, as you see in this picture. There's a parking row containing 33 bumper blocks already there, and what they're seeking is to keep those there. So our departments did take a look at this, assessing had no objection. Building noted that allowing the bumper blocks along a portion of the east limits of the parking lot does not create any building code issues, and no comments from fire or public works. Engineering noted the parking lot for the building was constructed many years ago without curbs. The grading for a portion of the paved area drains across the lot, so it's sheet draining essentially into this drain, and putting a curb up at this point would be substantial effort, but allowing bumper blocks or parking blocks in place does allow the water to flow as intended. And the parking lot in this area is steep, and it sits directly adjacent to the top of the bank of the Macomb drain. The drain embankment is also steep from top to bottom in this area. The parking blocks can act as a safety measure to help prevent cars from driving beyond the parking lot into the drain. Planning's comments, there's a significant downward slope where the parking lot meets the Macomb drain. These bumper blocks provide a protective barrier. And approval of the request will protect the public safety and welfare. So overall, staff's in support of this request. We do see a practical difficulty. There is a very steep slope there. But one thing I did want to point out is that, as you see in the graphic up there, the area in yellow is roughly the 33 that they have in place now. But I guess if you're going to say that health and safety, welfare of the residents is the practical difficulty, which I think it is, really all the area where the red line is could potentially have use for a bumper block. So even though they only want 33 now, maybe there's a time in the future where they would want more. I don't think we would be opposed to, if this is approved, allowing it anywhere in that area in the future.
All right, thank you, Mr. Box. Is there any questions for Mr. Box from the board?
This may be a stupid question. Why do we not allow bumper blocks?
It's been in the ordinance for a long
Yeah.
time. I don't know, Jim, if you have a,
I didn't know if there was a,
I think it's just because bumper blocks, as they age, become deteriorated, they break up and they look bad on a site, whereas most of our our standard now is everything needs to be curbed.
yeah, that's what
For whatever reason, this does not have curbs. I'm assuming that there was some sort of variance that was granted for curbs, maybe because of the drainage at some point in the past. But normally, this isn't an issue.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Do you have a question, Jim?
So is the red line outside of the yellow line curbed currently, or it's
No.
just,
that's all sheet draining, and I would say that all has a relatively steep slope. And the area in yellow is much closer to the actual drain, but it all has a little bit of a slope.
okay. And how would that be noted in a effective motion? Anything abutting the Macomb drain?
Anything abutting the Macomb drain or anything on the east side, the far east edge of the parking lot, something like that. So that way in the future, if they were to decide, maybe we need a few more bumper blocks, they don't have to come back before you.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Box, just a couple of clarifying questions for me. And maybe Mr. Van Tiffelen might chip in on this as well. Do we currently require a curb on all parking lots, or only that if we're doing
Everything
something?
requires a curb.
Okay. So in theory, this is already it either has a variance or it's not in compliance, one of the two.
One of the two.
Okay. And this was a new parking lot done as part of the,
So it's a little bit off the screen. To the north here, you can kind of see the drive aisle. A new parking lot was added up here. This area, they just reconstructed the existing parking lot that was already there.
so typically this would be probably mentioned during the permitting process. Was just curious why the curb wouldn't have been installed during
Prior to that, there was no curb either. I think they just replaced it in kind. I don't know, Jim, if you have a.
Yeah, essentially what they've done is a maintenance work on their parking lot. It did not have a curb. It was never set up for a curb. Obviously, this sheet drains into the drain. In order to put a curb there, they would have to run additional storm sewer, which was really outside of the scope of what they were doing. They were basically rehabilitating their parking lot. And we don't believe that if somebody wants to perform maintenance, resurface, even reconstruct their parking lot, that they should have to completely
update the
redo
engineering.
everything in order to make that happen. I think we would discourage people from properly maintaining their parking lots if we did that.
So we do require a permit for it, but if it requires substantial engineering rework, typically it's the stance of the township that they don't require that.
Correct. Yeah,
Okay. As long as it's not a safety concern in the meantime.
That's right. The new parking lot in the back that Josh mentioned does have a curb and does have enclosed storm sewer that goes to the drain. But we would typically not require that in the front. If they were to tear the entire site down and rebuild it as something else, then we would require the curb for sure.
Okay. Speaking to the, why this is in the ordinance in the first place, I remember Jerry Schmeiser, many years ago, ranting on the phone to me about why this was needed for a very long time. I think it was something he was very passionate about. And I believe there was one element, and that was that he kept seeing these blocks knocked off of there. As they get old, the concrete deteriorates and they would knock off. So I guess this partially brings me up to another question, and this is with regards to, I believe Josh is bringing up that health and safety is essentially the variance. Since these blocks can be knocked off, and since we're saying that the practical difficulty might be the damage or potential harm of a car driving in, couldn't we say that giving a variance from a curb actually decreases the health and safety of it, since a curb would always be there or would not move, whereas as a block could be knocked off of its pinnings?
I can, so I think that that would get into the maintenance of the site. They are still responsible for maintaining their site. And if those bumper blocks get into disrepair, then it's incumbent upon them to replace them, re-drill the holes, put new rebar down, buy new blocks, whatever that is. I suppose that if the township observed it, we could, follow up with them with a code enforcement with them and say, hey, you're granted a variance, you need to maintain these blocks because it's a safety issue.
Okay. Okay. All right. Any other questions? Go ahead, Mr.
Just
Piper.
led to another question. How high are the curbs that we require now on the newer parking lot
6 inch.
compared to the bumper blocks?
Yeah, I don't know how high, do you know how high those are?
Bumper blocks are 6 inches.
Yeah, they look like they're 6 inch, but
About 6
a standard curb would be 6 inches, so it's the same height.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right. With that, if the applicant's in the audience, if you would come forward, state your name and address for the record, and give any comments you might have.
Ron Kuznicki with Sean Check. My address is 1428 Chanticleer Circle, Wixom, Michigan.
You just make sure, are we catching him, Ed? Are you able to get it? Okay, good. Go ahead.
Jessica Stone, Chief Financial Officer for the Lutheran High School Association, 43197 Rivergate Drive in Clinton Township.
All right. Do you have any comments you want to add?
Just basically, it was maintenance. They had some storm sewers that were starting to fail that were put in the mid-70s. Whether it was a variance, the parking lot was originally built in the mid-70s. It may not have been a requirement at that time. I don't know. So, but yes, it is sheet draining. We were doing maintenance on the storm, and since the parking lot was going to be tore up, they said, let's repave it. And they were also doing the pavement to the north. That way their parking lot is all
Redone at the same
new.
time.
Everything's done and should last for many years. And the parking bumpers were there previously along that on the asphalt. And actually, I think there may have been more at some point in time, but when I look back at aerials back to 2013, I think, they were there, and they were there prior to that, I know too, so.
Okay. I believe Mr. Box had mentioned a longer stripe along the drain there. Is that anything that you're anticipating on putting more in if we were to include that with the variance request, or?
Well, I don't believe they're looking to put any additional in. That's the steep bank area. There's more of a green area, and it's not as steep, like to the south of there. And where it angles up, again, you can kind of see the green space before the drain. So it's not as steep. It's definitely nothing like it is right there at that drain. So I don't foresee them wanting to put any additional in. I mean, I don't think
Yeah,
so.
we've had no discussions around additional curbs. We've had no issues that warrant a discussion around additional parking bumpers. We just want to keep what's maintained there.
Okay. Part of my concern, for the record, and similar to what I was mentioning to Mr. Box, is if so we have a standard that we have to meet in order to grant a variance. It's unfortunately not, does it make sense? It's does it meet a practical difficulty? And my concern would be is if we state the practical difficulty is health and safety, and we expand the area on which we're saying the health and safety is required, but we do not require additional blocks to be put there, then we are sabotaging our own request to state a practical difficulty. So that's, I'll probably have some more questions later, but that's where my question is coming from, to make sure we're being consistent throughout the request. So, any other questions from the board to the petitioner? Hearing none, and without objection, I'm going to open it to the public. I believe the public that is left is leaving, just verifying that they don't want to comment. And without objection, I'm going to close the public comment, as they did not want to speak. Bring it back to the board for any comments or questions. All right, hearing none, I will open it up for motions. Are there any motions on this item?
I will make the motion. And that would be to grant the variance for section 10.0323E4 to permanent parcel 0808300026. And I would actually make the motion to grant the variance and to allow bumper blocks on the entire far east side of the property, should this become an issue in the future.
All right, motion by Mr. Coster. Is there support?
I will support that.
Supported by Mr. Piper. Is there any discussion on the motion? Jeff, you okay? Anything you want to bring up?
Yeah, just to clarify, you're not making a condition that they put those in there, but
No.
that they'd be allowed in the
No
future.
condition. If they want to put them in the future, they would be allowed to on the far east side.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
And I would request, Mr. DeCosta, that you just state the practical difficulty for the,
The practical difficulty is the fact that the parking lot sheet drains, and then that there is the slope, and there's no curb against the Macomb drain.
okay. Mr. Piper, you still
I'm
support
fine
that?
with that, yes.
Okay, very good. Any other discussion? Mr. Box, you're okay with the language of that? Okay. And while we're in discussion, you understand his motion, if approved, is to give you the ability to put it along the whole east side, but does not require it. Actually, it doesn't require it anywhere, it just gives you the ability to. Okay. All right, then I guess we will call the motion. Mr. DeCoster,
Yes.
Mr. Piper,
Yes.
Mr. Gamikia,
Yes.
Mr. Mazzara.
Yes.
Mr. Chuckfield votes no. That motion passes 4-1 in favor. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, that moves us on to item 9, which is public comments. I don't believe we have anybody left in the audience to comment, so I'm going to move on to ZBA member comments. Any comments from members this evening? All right, planning director comments. Mr. Box, anything?
Just that we will have a meeting in April.
All right, very good. Anything from our legal counsel this evening? All right. With that, we'll move on to item 13 for adjournment. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Gamikia. Is there support?
Support.
Supported by Mr. Mazzara. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed by saying nay. At 7:07, we stand adjourned.